Deval Morrison joining us as well, broker with Bosley Real Estate. Deval, happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, where do we begin? And I'll throw it over to you, Terry, as we do. This has been kind of gnawing at me, and I'm sure it is a lot of people after we saw the stabbing, yet another one on the transit system in the subway. And now we learned that the suspect who has been arrested and charged did not know the victims. So we say, random, what is going on here? And what is driving people onto our transit system and doing this kind of violence? And secondly, how do we get security on our transit system? I can't even believe I'm saying that. I said this earlier. I remember when I was a young reporter starting at City Hall many, many years ago, the safety of our system, it was dangled as a feature really around the world. Terry, how does this make you feel?
Well, it's pretty scary. We don't get this happening in Montreal very often. We do have a lot of jumpers, unfortunately, but when you look at these cases, and you've had a few now like this in Toronto, whenever there's a case like this where the perpetrators don't know the victims and they're not robbing them, then most likely the answer is that, these are cases of undiagnosed mental health issues. And the scary thing is, the problem with that is that it's like a natural disaster almost. You never know when something like this is going to happen due to mental illness. So, as for doing things about this, obviously more resources should be made available for mental health, but, also families and social groups need to, take care of each other and, kind of look for signs of this stuff, I think.
And what do they do, Deval? I mean, I'm worried it's contagious. We remember when Columbine happened, and then what happened, one, another, and it never stopped. And when it gets into the public possibility, unfortunately, it becomes an option for those in despair.
I think we need to have more security on the TTC. I mean, the reality is, remember last year there was that woman who was pushed into the tracks. And again, she did not know her assailant as well, too. So I would say, yes, it's becoming a huge problem. But, yeah, we need more security at all the stations to prevent this because people need to feel safe riding the TTC.
All right. And Deval, I'll just add this on and then throw it back to Terry here. What do you think is driving this? Like, I'm watching it, and it's flipping me out, to tell you the truth, because this is just so many things. This is Canada. This is Toronto. And then we have seen increases of violence. We've seen these sporadic things. They look sporadic during the pandemic in the United States, and it's not going away. Deval, is this like some kind of a cycle, do you think?
Well, I think the challenge is it's almost like we're becoming one of those big U.S. cities where bad things happen that we're not used to, right? We're used to our safe Toronto where things like this don't happen, where people don't have their cars stolen out of their driveways, where people aren't stealing packages off of their doorsteps. And it's almost unfortunate that we're sort of growing up as a big city. It's not the kind of city where we all want to live in. We want to live in a place where we feel a lot safer. So, there is a problem, but I think the only way to solve it is to really have more security in the TTC because people need to feel safe getting to and from work.
Yeah. Terry, would you agree? There's always a debate these days. How do you solve this kind of violence? Root cause, as you mentioned. And then on the other hand, what do you do about innocent people who just want to take transit? You can't have a functioning big city without good and safe transit, Terry.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there may be part of this could be is obviously mental health illness issues because you don't do this unless you have mental health issues. But it also could be drug related as well, like the high incidence of drug addicts who have mental health issues and they're riding the metro. The thing about security is security just can't really be everywhere all at once. You can have buttons on the train or you can have someone on the platform. But, if it's not really going to stop a guy who's on a car somewhere and just decides to pull something out and just stab somebody randomly, right? So that's the thing about security. But, yeah, it's very troubling. But I think there is probably a host of issues that come with Toronto becoming such a big city with a drug problem now and a lot of mental health issues.
I know, and this is the scary part, develop. Before the show today, I was reading about New York, and remember all the concern about the increased violence on the subways there. And they had this conversation. Maybe you're onto something. Are we evolving? Are we become a so-called world-class city? Or are we adopting this kind of stuff? And to Terry's point, sometimes what are you going to do if somebody wants to push somebody? But also, there is a sense, and I know they've used it in New York. We talked about it on the show yesterday, the broken windows theory that worked decades ago. But there is a sense that if somebody's there watching, there is some kind of security, it may be a little safer.
Absolutely. But I think it also goes back to one of those fundamentals where we all have to care a little bit more about each other. Right? And so if we look at how we're treating everybody in the city, we look at our growing homelessness crisis. And I mean, I've never seen so many people sleeping on the street in my life. Now, that being said, when I travel around the world, I'm now seeing it everywhere I go. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to solve the problem here. To me, that's what Toronto should be doing as a world-class city. Figure out the homelessness crisis, and maybe we won't have these other issues happening. But, people are obviously in a bad state. They need help. And we need to care a little bit more about our fellow humans in the city.
All right. How do we show we care, Terry? What should we be doing? Big question.
I know that I've taken the subway in Toronto a few times, and it always has that, if you see something, say something, which they also have in London, which I don't really think works. It may work for security purposes, but and as far as like when you're on a metro and something happens, we have something, like we have a bystander effect, and we usually people don't even help each other, which is a problem. But of course, they're thinking about themselves, or they back up. It's like they tell you not to scream help, scream fire instead. But I do think there's caring about each other while you're on the metro. Like, you need to pay attention to what's going on in your surroundings, and always kind of be alert. But also, on the citywide level, when you're noticing that people are sleeping on, vents on the street in Toronto, and there's lines to food banks and stuff like that, you have to start petitioning your government to find out what's going on. Because these mental health effects, we're going to see them pop up in different places in society.
Yeah, look at how often that happens. Finally, before we take a break and return, I want to ask you, as we look at this, it is part, as we just said, of a bigger problem. And as you mentioned, is what do you do when you're on there? And I am aware. And with all this new violence, I don't take it a lot, but I had to jump on. And it's the first thing I thought of. And I can get it really, being in this business for so long, I can get a little too aware. I'm watching and saying if somebody was going to do that, there's a defense mechanism, but there's also a fear. We've all been on a transit where it looks like something really dicey was about to happen, and people are terrified. You're in an enclosed space capsule there. You could just go in a moment.
It's true. I've been on the subway, in fact, recently, where there was somebody, making strange noises, and, I kind of wanted to walk away from the situation, but my boyfriend was sort of doing the, it's okay, I've got you. Mm-hmm. Because as women, I think we ride transit a lot differently than men do, right? So it's a huge issue in terms of feeling safe, even within the car.
Absolutely. We're going to take a break and we will return. It is an all-girl band here today on Topics Worthy of Discussion. We have Terry Newman, DeVal Morrison. I'm Arlene Bynon in for John Oakley. We'll return right after this. This is 640 Toronto. .ca. Here's our panel. We have Terry Newman and DeVal Morrison as we go through things today. As we stick with Toronto, but it's broad. It affects everywhere, every city, every part of our country. Can we get away from housing? There was a new housing plan announced today by Toronto Mayor John Tory, and all things are looked really across the country. And if anybody announces a housing plan, I know once they did anything, and even in BC, everybody's jumping on it now, going, what are they doing and what are the solutions? There's going to be major zoning changes. We know there's this new strong mayor deal that's gone through as well. And Terry, I'll throw it to you. what are we watching for? Can these things look good again on paper? And I'm going to go. I mean, we're all in a blaze here as we realize that the Eglinton Crosstown in the city, which has taken billions, and it's just incredible how it's just been a complete mess. But things aren't working. Terry, are we confident that some of the solutions we're seeing in places like Toronto that was announced today can solve these problems, like getting rid of the zoning walls?
Oh, it's a good question. I haven't seen the plans myself, but I did hear the early talks about changing the zoning so that it would be more instead of just regular housing into multi-unit housing. Is that the same thing they're going through with? But it's yet to be seen what will happen. I'm not particularly familiar with the Toronto situation, so maybe Devel would, especially in her specialty, would have a lot to say about that.
Yeah, absolutely, Devel. But you have skin in the game here to sell these houses. How are you feeling about this plan announced by Mayor John Tory today?
Well, it's funny, actually. I haven't heard what the plan was. If it is just to make sure that people as of right can build multiple units in their single household place, and that's great. I mean, I think it's great that they've already removed the development charges for someone who's building under, I believe it's under 4 units, because in the past, someone would take a single-family dwelling, and if they wanted to turn that into a triplex, they could get stuck paying the City of Toronto somewhere upwards of $120,000 in fees before they even started working with an architect or doing renovations. So anything that we can do to encourage more people to increase the density within our city where there already is infrastructure is exactly what we should be doing.
What about What about rooming houses? He's going to make it easier for rooming houses to get people, again, off the street, some of the things we've been worried about. But Deval, when you sell a house, are people, they ask about the neighborhood. Is it time to give that up?
It's funny. I think back to, and I shouldn't say I think back to because obviously I wasn't alive at this time, but the early 1900s, rooming houses were completely common. And many people rented a room in somebody's house, and it was completely normal. So
it wasn't low life. It wasn't people on the down and low. Lots of people did it.
That's my point, is that, I think when we're talking about rooming houses, we have this idea that it's low life. But when you look at the early 1900s, it was just average people that simply just didn't have enough money that they would be okay to rent out a room in somebody's house. I mean, we have a ton of baby boomers in the city that are living in houses that are 3 and 4 bedrooms that are so large, they clearly don't need that space. They might need a couple of extra bucks. But on the other note, in order to get a 1-bedroom condo in Toronto, you're looking at about $2,300 a month. So where's the in-between? You're either looking at $2,300 a month. If you can't afford anything else, okay, maybe you're in a basement apartment that's about $1,500 a month, or maybe you're sleeping on the street. So, earlier we were just talking about the homeless problem that we have. Maybe we wouldn't have such a bad problem if we actually had opportunities for people to rent rooms and houses, that way they could spend $500 a month or $800 a month, and it would be more affordable for people. I think that we have to get out of this idea of sort of looking down at, I live in my single-family dwelling house, and there's no way that my next-door neighbor could be, a rental or, a duplex or a triplex or a rooming house. I mean, it's a bit much.
It is a bit snotty. Have we reached the point, Terry, that the crisis has happened? Are people starting to get it? Because Devel is correct. Some of the old big houses on Jarvis Street in Toronto, they used to be, grand family homes, but they also used to be a different kind of a rooming house. And we all know in Europe, there were people rented a room, and it was just a wise thing to do. Are we ready, Terry, to look at things in a fresh new way?
I think we should be. I mean, absolutely. It's not a bad idea to start doing that. And also, I think we're probably going to see a switch after the pandemic to more multi-generational homes. People taking care of their family members more often. Especially after seeing how, some of the CLSCs or the homes treated individuals in the homes. So I think we're going to see a lot of families using their homes, their space differently. Toronto is really an interesting case because it's just the prices are just absolutely to the moon, even compared to Montreal still. So yeah, I agree with Devel, there is no in between. And even a condo, is as much as a house now. So usually you wouldn't, you never think of a condo. You would think of it maybe as a first step to a home. But now the home is completely out of reach. And now for some, condos are completely out of reach. So something has to give.
Devel, before we take a break, let me ask you, do you sense a shift in the mindset of customers right now?
For buyers, absolutely. I mean, I would say now that it's the holiday season, everybody's sort of taking a breather and thinking of next year. So they're going to start picking up.
But for all these things we've been talking about, are they ready? We've got rezoning happening. The worry about what's in your neighborhood is not going to work as much. Are they ready for it?
No, they're not. There's tons of NIMBYers out there.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I live in Midtown Toronto, and I feel like I'm surrounded by NIMBYers because they certainly fight every condo development that goes up. But the reality is that our city needs to intensify, and we need to intensify where there's already infrastructure.
We do. And that is completely looking around the city, you just imagine all these things that are changing, and it's going to completely change this city and other ones. That's one. This crisis really got out of hand. And we're back. We have Terry Newman and Devel Morrison with us. Terry, I'll throw it to you. Let's talk healthcare. We had the premiers holding a news conference today, and they asked for more money with no strings attached. Kind of ties into a bunch of stories about power grabs from the provinces. And it also, we were just talking about fresh eyes and new solutions for things. And strategy, to me, would be one of the big words for this year. Strategy and subsidies and benefits and strategy in healthcare. What are your thoughts on how the premiers kind of asking for what they've done before? It's a bit of Groundhog Day. They ask for that every time.
Yeah, I mean, they don't have a lot of trust between themselves, the premiers and the government. So, each province and territory has very different needs, which I think should be assessed, and possibly even by a committee that is independent of both the federal and provincial governments. They have no trust. They're not really good at dealing together. But one thing's for sure, many of the systems that are in place in the provinces and territories do not work, and we should probably reevaluate them entirely before we start dropping more money into them. And maybe, as part of an independent committee, provinces should be sharing their best practices and, their mistakes, and serious consideration should go into this before we start putting it into failing systems. But whatever happens, there needs to be transparency on both levels, federal and provincial levels. But given what we've seen during the pandemic, and even before the pandemic, healthcare in Quebec, and I'm sure Toronto as well, has been horrible here. And probably there as well. So, before money gets paid and funneled to these provinces who have already not been doing it well, perhaps there should be some type of outside committee looking at what's working and what's not working first.
Yeah, good idea. Who's on the committee and how do we do it? I know there was a great piece months and months and months ago by Robin Doolittle in the Globe and Mail, really a big deep dive on what's wrong with our healthcare system. And it's kind of not set up properly to work in all these ways. It's kind of hard, again, it's kind of like a renovation, isn't it? Do you gut the place or do you use what you have, Devel? I'll talk your real estate language there.
Sure. I guess I'm sort of confused by I don't know what happens in the other provinces, but in our province, Ford's asking the government for more money for healthcare. Sounds like a good idea in theory, but I keep hearing that there's a surplus, money that he already has that he's not spending on our system. So I would question that, number one. I do think it's important that he outline what this extra money is going to be used for. We've heard time and time again how underpaid our nurses are and we're in crisis. I mean, we have kids being treated in adult hospitals because there's simply not enough beds for them. So, yes, of course we need more money, but I definitely think we need to have more nurses and doctors involved in a lot more of these decisions because it doesn't feel like anybody who actually works in the medical field opinions are actually being taken into account here when we are at such a crisis level.
And they are being attacked. We saw this in the pandemic. And there was a pushback against health officials because a lot of those restrictions. Terry, has this created a different kind of a battlefield here after what we've seen? We can't unsee it.
Yeah, I mean, there's the conflict between the public and what the health officials are doing as well. So with the restrictions and the pandemic, a lot of doctors went obviously off work. A lot of nurses were plain out fired for not being vaccinated. I think they're thinking about hiring some back now. But also, a lot of decisions in the health field have indirectly possibly caused other effects. Like, for example, the respiratory illnesses may be, the rise in children may be caused by children staying inside and not actually being exposed to things. So we have all these kind of domino effects. Definitely, this is not a decision for administrators. It has to be something that an assessment needs to be done by speaking to everyone at each stakeholder level. And, looking at private-public mixes, trying to figure out what's done. But transparency, we just have no transparency around healthcare in Canada.
No, we don't. And then develop, it creates an atmosphere of misinformation, disinformation. There was this immunity gap story that was going around, and it's really been pushed back by a lot of very, very credible people after this. It creates doubt in people's mind. Is that part of it here? I agree to Terry's point, asking for transparency, but now there's a political interpretation of that. What it means.
Well, I would just add, if we go back to, the kids with the respiratory illnesses right now, I remember in the middle of the pandemic, and they said that Sick Kids Hospital is recommending that kids should be in school. And nobody seemed to want to listen to them. And I think, again, we need to listen to the people who actually are educated to know about these things. I think the people at Toronto Sick Kids Hospital know exactly what they're talking about when it comes to kids and healthcare. And I think that, listening to recommendations like that, maybe we wouldn't be in this position had people listened. So I still go back to, I don't think we're listening to our medical officials who are educated, who actually understand what's going on with all of our health. And I think we need to pay them that respect that they're due, that their education allows.
And there was a lot of the medical officials I talked to said there's a way to do it. There was a in my opinion, and I'm not alone, a big lag in admitting this was airborne, and you change your air. You have a completely different situation. I have to tell you, and I'll swing it back to you, Terry, just even talking about it sends us all into trauma because we just, I'm like, oh my God, I'm talking about it again, but it's a part of it.
Yeah.
Terry, what's our mindset here? We began talking about the stabbing on the subway and had a great conversation about what's happening in our society. And we talked about caring about each other. How dangerous do you think the collective psyche is right now where people are? Nothing's working. Whether or not you're planning something from a political point of view, can they build a subway? Can they build a crosstown? Yeah. Can we fix our healthcare system? We used to have faith in things, but it seems like everything's broken. What do you think it's doing to the public feeling about things?
I think there's a lot of despair, and I think that the pandemic was a time that really, I watched it going to coffee shops, and I saw a woman, being attacked for wearing a cloth mask in a store, being hollered at by another woman, and I saw all kinds of things that showed that there was a kind of like a deep polarization going on in our society that just really didn't feel like Canada to me. So I think right now people are kind of, they don't trust government. They're worried. They're worried about what's best for their kids. They're not really sure that the government has their best interests at heart, be it at the federal or the provincial levels. And you have COVID looming over us. Will this go back? Will it go back again? And some people have completely changed their lives and moved out of the city, you know. So I mean, I think people are generally in turmoil, and you know, there's been lots of divorces over just like there was over Donald Trump. You know, people fighting over things, and you know,
families
about
divided, terrible.
Yeah, over you know over vaccination status and stuff like that.
But
but you know, even for the health experts, you know, there are people that talk about. They disagree about what should be done with the kids in the schools, right? And what is necessary. And there's some people who are really, you know, zero COVID, and you know, because of, you know, some people having immune deficiency. But you know, it's finding that spot that's kind of like a reasonable spot, right? And you know, you have medical experts that speak on each level of that.
Yeah,
so
but there's
it's
different
kind of hard
kinds.
to just say medical experts.
But there's different kinds of medical experts too. I'm going to go with that. I mean, I people sometimes go shopping for medical experts. Why don't, I mean, let's turn it around. I was also, all of these kind of tie in together, even the next story, Hockey Canada back in the news. And we have the word that as they were settling these sexual assault allegations, there were injured players